Dennis Weaver despised him more than anyone else. William Dennis Weaver was born on June 4, 1924, in Joplin, Missouri. Weaver's realistic vision of the world came from growing up in a simple, hard-working family. He gained early lessons about being humble, responsible, and persistent while growing up during the Great Depression. These traits would eventually shape both his performances and his personal life. Later, his family moved to Oklahoma City, where he became interested in sports and acting. This showed early hints of the discipline and focus that would help him as an adult. World War II changed Weaver's life in a big way. He was a US Navy pilot, and that experience had a big impact on his sense of responsibility and moral consciousness. He learned to be serious and mature while serving in the military, something audiences would later notice on screen, especially in jobs that required him to deal with moral dilemmas, inner turmoil, or restraint. After the war, he went to college and studied acting at the University of Oklahoma. He then got a scholarship to the famous Actor Studio in New York. There, he learned the basics of method acting, which focuses on emotional sincerity and psychological realism, while working with future legends. In the 1950s, he got his big break when he played Chester Goode on the long-running Western TV show Gunsmoke. Weaver played one of TV's most iconic supporting characters as the shy, limping deputy to James Arz's tall Marshal Matt Dillon. When Westerns frequently relied on tough guys, Chester was different. He was gentle, devoted, vulnerable, and very human. Weaver's portrayal changed what a Western sidekick could be, and people loved him for his sensitivity, not in spite of it. His performance won him an Emmy and made him a household name. Weaver, on the other hand, didn't want to be limited to one role. He quit Gunsmoke at the height of its popularity to work on more difficult material, which was one of the most daring career choices of the time. This choice showed how brave he was as an artist and how much he wanted to grow. He quickly became famous for his role as a widowed park ranger in Gentle Ben. His friendship with a tame bear became a symbol of kindness, respect for the nature, and emotional rehabilitation. The series showed Weaver's warmth and moral authority, which helped to build his reputation as a man of conscience and empathy. His most famous role was as Sam McCloud, a lawman from rural New Mexico who had to deal with crime in New York City. Weaver was able to mix humor, toughness, and intelligence into the role, making a character who was both out of place and quietly powerful. He won several Emmys for his performance, which made him one of the most versatile leading men on TV. McCloud was more than just a police spectacle. It was a character study, and Weaver's nuanced acting took it to a whole new level. Weaver was also in a lot of movies, such Duel 1971, which was one of Steven Spielberg's first great movies. Weaver gave a riveting, modest portrayal as an ordinary man who was scared by an unseen truck driver. He relied on psychological suspense instead of showy effects. His portrayal of terror, frustration, and survival struck a chord with fans and is still one of the most famous performances in thriller movies. Dennis Weaver cared a lot about helping people and the environment outside of performing. He was an early supporter of renewable energy, conservation, and social justice. He started the Institute of Economics to promote living sustainably and being responsible for the environment. Weaver lived by his ideals. He built an energy-efficient house and used his public platform to encourage people to take care of the earth. His activism was not showy. It was based on principles, knowledge, and a long-term commitment. Dennis Weaver's marriage to Jerry Stell was one of the most stable and grounded partnerships of his life. It provided a modest but strong contrast to a career that mostly took place in the public eye. The two got married not long after World War II. When the US was coming out of years of war and many young couples were focused on rebuilding stability and the hope of a better future, Weaver had been a pilot in the US Navy during the war, and this time was a big change for him. He went from the discipline and danger of military life to the uncertainty of civilian life and the long, hard road to a career in the arts. Jerry Stell became Weaver's wife and his lifelong partner in every way. Dennis wanted to be an actor, but it was a job that involved a lot of rejection, instability, and extended periods away from home. Jerry, on the other hand, gave emotional support and a stable home base. Weaver's early tribulations in Hollywood, when success was far from definite and financial stability was shaky, didn't terminate their marriage. Weaver worked hard in theater and television before he became famous, frequently in small or supporting roles, and Jerry's steadfastness and faith in him were really important during these early years. Dennis and Jerry raised 3 kids together: Richard, Robert, and Rustin Weaver. Weaver's family life was very important to him. Even as his work duties rose, Weaver made a conscious effort to stay in his son's life even though he had to work long hours on shows like Gunsmoke and subsequently McCloud. He often talked about how important it was to be honest, curious, and independent, traits he strove to exemplify as a father and as a public figure. The Weaver family put a lot of emphasis on education, being conscious of the environment, and being attentive about how they interact with the world. This shows how Dennis's hobbies have changed while he was an actor. Jerry's job as a mother was just as important. She kept things normal for the family even though being famous put a lot of stress on them. She kept her sons from becoming too public and encouraged them to follow their own paths. The couple didn't want to be in the public eye in Hollywood. They wanted a peaceful existence that would provide their kids a stable environment to grow up in. This choice said a lot about what they both valued and how they thought success was more than just being famous. Dennis Weaver's work grew throughout the years to include activism, especially for environmental and humanitarian concerns. Jerry was always there for him during these times. She was always there for him, whether it was to help him with his work for groups like UNICEF or to support his commitment to living a sustainable life later on. She helped them keep the values they had developed as a family. Their marriage lasted more than 60 years, which is a remarkable example of a long-lasting relationship in an industry notorious for short-term relationships. Dennis Weaver had a lot of professional connections over his lengthy career in radio, TV, and movies, but none were as tense, difficult, and emotionally fraught as his friendship with fellow Gunsmoke actor Ken Curtis. There have been many fights and disagreements between people in Hollywood history, but the tension between Weaver and Curtis was different because it lasted so long and had such a big effect on Weaver's personal and professional life. Dennis Weaver was a very disciplined actor who thought that preparation, psychological depth, and emotional reality were important. He didn't just see acting as a job. He saw it as a craft that required respect and seriousness. Ken Curtis, on the other hand, comes from a totally different place. Curtis was a singer, guitarist, and performer whose style was more showy and expansive. Curtis was a great performer who was loved by fans, but his style of working often clashed with Weaver's more focused, inward-looking style. Weaver subsequently thought about how the two guys had never been on the same page from the start. In interviews, he said that Curtis's presence changed the tone of Gunsmoke in ways that made him angry. Weaver thought the show was finest when it focused on moral ambiguity and human weakness. Curtis's character, Phecis Hagen, on the other hand, became more and more of a comic relief and over-the-top frontier figure. Weaver said that the show was starting to tilt more toward caricature than character, which was hard for him to accept. Weaver felt especially bad about the situation since he thought that Curtis's growing popularity made his own role less important. Chester Good was a big part of Gunsmoke's early success, and Weaver was proud to have helped shape the show's emotional core. Weaver felt left out when Curtis joined the cast and rapidly became a fan favorite. He said afterward that it felt like everything I had worked so hard to build was being swept aside all of a sudden. This animosity wasn't only professional envy. It was a deeper feeling of being misunderstood and not valued. Weaver thought that Curtis didn't care enough about the severe stakes in the show. He is said to have said that Curtis played to the audience instead of the moment, which showed Weaver's anger at what he viewed as a lack of creative integrity. Weaver thought that Curtis had a distinct way of thinking about entertainment. He thought that Curtis's style focused more on short-term laughter and folksy appeal than on deep stories that last a long time. The hostility between the two guys became harder to overlook behind the scenes. Weaver was known to be pleasant and professional on set, but co-workers later said that there was always a clear chill when Curtis was around. Years later, Weaver said that he had been angry for too long and that it wasn't good for him. Still, he never really changed his mind, which suggests that the emotional wounds never really healed. In the end, the issue led Weaver to depart Gunsmoke in 1964. He said he was bored with the show and wanted to try something new. But others close to him knew that his uneasiness with the show's changing direction and Curtis's growing involvement in it were big reasons for his decision. Weaver later suggested that staying would have meant surrendering his ideals, saying in effect that I couldn't be a part of something that didn't feel right to me anymore. History has treated both men well in different ways, which is ironic. Later generations couldn't separate Ken Curtis from the image of Gunsmoke, while Dennis Weaver went on to redefine himself with strong roles in Gentle Ben, Duel, and McCloud. but Weaver never fully changed how he felt about Curtis. Even after a long time and a lot of success. He had a lot of fights and disappointments in Hollywood, but this was the one that still made him feel the most. The story of Dennis Weaver and Ken Curtis is not only one of hate. It's also about different ways of thinking, hurt pride, and the steep personal cost of creative compromise. Weaver's strong reactions show how much he loved his work and how much it hurt him when it clashed with a vision he couldn't accept. Dennis Weaver's death signaled the end of a life that had been lived with a lot of passion, conviction, and purpose. He died at home in Ridgway, Colorado on February 24, 2006. At the age of 81 after a long fight with prostate cancer, Weaver died in the mountain village he loved so much. Not in a hospital or in front of a lot of people. This is how he wanted to live in his senior years. His death showed the same values that had guided him for many years: independence, caring about the environment, and like real things more than Hollywood shows.